Thank you very much, moderator. It is a privilege to share ideas of a curriculum perspective in an audience such as these. Members in the audience, I'm sure, are all educationists, but I want to take a perspective of what are we trying to do as we design an education system or design a curriculum intervention. I speak as an extension probably of the first panel, talking about the issue of not so much why we need peace education, but instead to talk about how do we do it. What are we actually trying to achieve as we try to achieve the conceptual goals or the curriculum format, or what kind of impact? And as you can see in the questions on the slide, what do we actually mean when we talk about infusing a curriculum intervention in the form of peace education? Do we all understand the same thing? And I take a very interesting book out, a leaf out of the book of the first panel, where, for example, if we look at the American perspective or the African perspective or the Asian perspective that we heard, are there commonalities or are there differences across these particular contexts which asks us to intervene in the nature of curriculum building in different ways? Difference does not necessarily mean problems of not finding a universal solution, but intending to be responsive to a situated pedagogy, a pedagogy that is appropriate to the context within which we find ourselves. So I'd like to extend that debate to ask what philosophies of curriculum underpin our thinking around the nature of peace education. We've had an example in the last speaker of a Hizmet philosophy, but are there other alternative peace-building philosophies that can be drawn on? What shape or form could those take? And then how will we know when we've achieved a peace education? What will be the hallmarks of success? We often know in curriculum interventions of the assessment scores or the performativities of a schooling system. How will we know that we've achieved a peace education? I want to look at three kinds of areas in the structure of my presentation by first focusing on those goals. What are those goals? And I want to draw on possibly three possible philosophies, drawing from my own context. Firstly, as a Catholic, talking about a tradition of monastic and monastery missionary positions in the way in which we engage with peace education. Then to talk about a philosophy similar to the one we heard from the Philippines of Ubuntu, and then to talk about what we mean by deliberative action. I'll challenge the notion about whether we need a formal intervention in the curriculum at all, and give you some alternatives by some exemplary positions of a schooling system, some positions in a university system, and then to talk about our hero in the South African context of Nelson Mandela and the International Mandela Day, which has been declared as the 18th of July since 2011. And what can we learn from the International Mandela Day? Journeys of becoming. In the monastic tradition, we have a situation where the focus is of trying to retreat away from the world in order to understand the world. It is often misunderstood as being a retreat away from the world. And instead, the second tends to be more evangelical in its approach, but nevertheless is attempting to connect with the world. Now, often this is misunderstood as oppositional stances towards realizing an alternative. An alternative includes both being sufficiently critically distant from our current world, but remain in the world. To be able to understand how to bring these two conceptions of being critical of the valuing systems that we have in our own society. As a philosophy, we can learn very much from the monastic traditions as well as the missionary positions by examining ways of contemplating the notion of what it means to realize God, to realize a creator, but to realize peace and humanity across our diversity. The second tradition is to suggest that these are not oppositional, because in essence, they are talking about being connected to the world, but not of the world. And I think this is repeated by several, Mahatma Gandhi, Fethullah Gulen, Nelson Mandela, all talking about the conception of how to relate to the world, and being at the same time not engaged with just simply an individualistic journey, but a journey to call to duty and vocation, a journey of recognizing one's sense of what it means to be part of a humanity. It's an inner calling, but also an outward calling. It is a call to service and a means of deliberatively engaging in both meditatively and contemplative ways in order to see a direction forward. It is about deliberative action. Now, when we think about those, these resonate with an African philosophy, which is a simple philosophy of saying, I only gain my existence because of you. I only am able to make sense of who I am because you exist, in direct contrast to me, in direct dialogue with me. And Ubuntu is a philosophy that is suggesting that we are shaped as well as that we shape others. Now, if we take all of these conceptions about what we mean by peace education, then we're talking about its deep realization of an interconnectedness with others, a deep valuing of the contribution of others to our own life. We're talking about then not just a pacifist movement. Very often peace education is misunderstood to be not about war, and that peace is about doing nothing. But instead, peace is an active issue of attempting to realize the absence of conflict, but also consciously building an alternative system for the collective good. Now, therefore, for me, peace education is about an individual pathway, but also a communal pathway. And we cannot talk about simply educating individuals, but talking about educating a community, a communal campaign of collectivity. So how do we translate this in an educational intervention? I'm skeptical of the issue that curriculum is about a formal taught syllabus. Very often we have many content issues being infused into the education system, and peace education becomes yet another added component into the formal schooling curriculum, overburdening the current situation of what we're trying to do in an education system of realizing competence and excellence as well. I'm not simply talking about mastery of content as what our education system should be. I'm not talking about just simply pandering to the audit culture phenomenon that we have in the education system. Or I'm not talking about an education system that sucks out imagination or creativity. Instead, what I'm talking about of trying to realize that a competent individual is an individual that draws together not only knowledge, but also skills, heart, and mind. Or the last one, trying to look at the issue of creativity also being infused into the education system. So we talk about knowledge, skills, and values as part of the experience of being in a schooling system. For me, curriculum is not about content. Curriculum is about experience, the totality of experience that we are organizing, managing for our learners, so that a learner inherits a consequence of habits, rituals, routines, habitats, ways of being in a school environment. If we're paying attention to how our schools live, breathe, eat, sleep, drink, the quality of values, then we are building a quality curriculum for education. So it's not only what is taught, but what is learnt, or more importantly, what is caught inconsequential or in the process of becoming on this journey of an education system. So for me, how do we do it? Peace education is not a formal module. It's not a course. It's not a lesson in the timetable. It's not, for me, civic education or religious education or another intervention, because these run the risk of becoming nationalistic, proselytizing, or ideological positions, or evangelical brainwashing situations as interventions within the curriculum. Peace education is about learning to belong to a collective. It's a learning to belong across all of our diversities: sexual orientation, race, gender, region, internationality, nationality, regionality. All of those things are interconnected. So I want to share with you an example of what goes wrong when we intervene in a formal way. In a particular program called the Life Orientation Program in the South African curriculum, intervene with all the noble intentions of bringing together a personal, moral, and physical well-being in an education system. Yes, we all applaud it, but is it aiming to do what it claims to do, to transform the society, to bring about a new society? Let's look at some of the skepticisms. Number one, it's not an examinable subject. So it's a subject that sits on the outside and then does not include the number of points if you pass this course as entry requirements to university. So what actually is the message that is being signaled in this curriculum situation? It's an exotic other that can sit on the fringe. It's not really important, so students soon learn. You can fail this one, it's okay, doesn't matter. And you can just move on in the curriculum. Secondly, the resources to teach this curriculum. Many teachers join this particular course because they have to fill the gap of their workload. So therefore, it gets added onto the workload. Teachers need to teach X number of hours every week. So you haven't got enough hours, you can add life orientation as the added piece. Very often, this is how peace education also is added into the curriculum. It's a filler, as I said, for the workloads of teacher. It becomes fragmented because very often the individuals who have to teach this from a moral, physical, or social well-being come from different parts of the curriculum or different disciplinary expertise. And we have a fragmented delivery where no one seems to know what the other is doing in the nature of the joined-up thinking that's necessary in curriculum. Students soon jettison it. They soon allow it to be an exotic other and therefore does not get taken seriously. Now, other examples of when we introduce formal curriculum in gender studies, when we introduce it, maybe named in different ways, or maybe other examples of these kind of exotic others that get added into the curriculum. Race studies, Asian studies, European studies, Christian studies, women's studies, all of these with very noble intentions, but who takes them? They're usually optional, and it's usually for the converted, for the activist who already believes in these goals. And what we see is that the individuals just cement their present perspectives in the curriculum, and it is seen as for those who believe already. So it remains on the fringes of the official curriculum, and one should do an analysis. If we take gender studies for an example, who selects to do gender studies? Who are the individuals engaged with it? Who teaches the courses? Why are they teaching the course to begin with? So How does this relate to peace education? For me, peace education could then become exoticized, essentialized, placed on the fringes, and in doing so, negate the very intentions that we wish. It could be understood as a kind of indoctrination. It could be understood as for those who already believe in it. Or the very intentions of why we're introducing the course become totally subverted. This is not what we're attempting to do in peace in any curriculum. So what's my preference? My preference is not for a formal intervention. My preference is about developing the lived and enacted experiences of all learners and teachers, about valuing and infusing at all levels of the education system a conception of what Robinson calls habits and habitats, or routines and rituals of schools. We must be thinking about peace education in terms of how our very own initiative might be othering or silencing other versions. Or how do we think, as the last one of the speakers on our panel talked about, our multiple histories, the way in which we understand the multiple narrative nature of peace education. Peace education, therefore, is about a deep commitment to non-othering, towards full and deep recognition of the dignity of all. It is and cannot be a simple, superficial action. It should not be a simple, superficial action, but a commitment to inclusion at many different and varied levels. I want to share now with you a particular school that attempted to live, breathe, eat, sleep, work, habit, and routine the concept of respect. Besides it being the formal motto, it translated into the admissions policy, into the way in which the architecture of the school is designed. It translated into the way in which businesses got involved with managing the school. It talked about how the school understood its notion of service to the community in which it engaged. It talked about deliberately disrupting the schooling system for 2 weeks in a project fortnight and working across multiple grades, across working with communities. So, for example, teaching individuals in a community service of understanding a school curriculum that is not only about academic activities. So the particular school went up to 2 o'clock every day, and from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, engages with some form of intervention with a community, such as reading to a sick person in a hospital, teaching mathematics to the cleaners in the school. These are conceptions of understanding community service as well in the curriculum. In the middle of the school was planted a tree called the Soweto tree, which was in commemoration of those who fought for a language policy of all different languages to be respected in the new transformed South Africa. In the center of the tree, even in the building, you can see in the architecture, is a conception of respect, dialogue, tolerance, and love. There are many other examples of the school that I can talk on for many times, but I want to talk about another student formation as exemplars of a deeply infused curriculum. It's an organization that spans across 3 levels, an international, national, and local level, which attempts to join a philosophy of people, planet, and profit, or in another way, equity, economics, and environment into the way in which we think. What it does, it brings students in small groups to conceptualize a fundraising project for a community to become self-sufficient. It then has weekly meetings to track work in progress and then coordinates this into the activities of its students. Presently, 26 higher education institutions work towards presenting in dialogue to each other the kind of interventions that they engage with. And it sounds like the Davis Project that we heard of in New Jersey. We have an annual competition internationally across 16,000 universities in 39 countries. These students work towards responsible leadership or developmental leadership. You can see what's being infused into this kind of students in free enterprise initiative is an idea that in order to resolve peace, you also have to talk about development. In order to talk about development, you have to talk about equity. In order to talk about equity, you have to talk about environment, etc., in a joined-up thinking of a curriculum intervention. My institution happens to be the national winner and come to Washington next year. So that's why I'm so proud of what the kind of activities that they currently engaged with. Another organization is a voluntary organization, Community Development Association, which moves away from talking about student leadership as being directed towards self, and instead to talk about a direction of assisting other students or other learners in lower grades, a community outreach, engaging in debates, poetry, music within the university system as well as within the community as well. So what we're seeing here is that the idea of leadership moves away from the official conceptions of leadership is about self and moving to the conception of leadership as service. But herein lies the challenge. Most of these organizations, such as SIFE and CDA, tend to be geographically and racially skewed in the present South African situation. So most of these are African students. Where are white students in the curriculum? Why are they not engaging in such kind of conceptions? Are these only for projects that are based for students in the residence? So you can see as we start to engage with constructing an alternative, it also has the possibility of becoming exoticized for certain people only. Only black people need to worry about equity, for example. Why? So herein lies the challenge of how we understand in a transforming national agenda, the agenda for reconstruction, because peace education is also about that kind of reconstruction. I want to end with an example of our national hero, Nelson Mandela, who has suggested, rather than draw attention to himself on this International Mandela Day, he argues, give 67 minutes of your life on that particular day in commemoration of the 67 years of official public service that he has given in his own life. So again, it's not attention to self, but attention to service. Moving away from trying to do, as he says, not heroic things, but instead, let's look at small actions, small things that we need to do at various levels. And so this has become an international day declared by the United Nations, but also is now infusing to move to extend beyond just simply a one-day-in-the-year event to be an event that translates in many different days of our lives. And now we've started the conception of a Mandela Monday. It's small actions, and these are the small actions. Think of others. Help out for good health education. Just become an educator. Help those living in poverty. Treasure the elderly. Look after the environment. And what has come out of the foundation is a list of a series of actions. And I just want to list that. You won't be able to read all of them, but let me just read two of them. Make a new friend. Read to someone who can't. Number 10, donate your skills. Number 17, sponsor a group of learners to go to the theater or a zoo. And you can see what he is suggesting is that peace education is not heroism. It's about small actions, small things that you do in your everyday life. He's gone on to talk about, and I'm not going to list each of 67 things. You can look at them in the paper that is suggested. Treasure the elderly is one of my favorite ones. But you see, number 60, mow someone's lawn and help them to fix things around their house. As simple as that. That is what will change and develop deep-seated quality change. I'm skipping these so to comment that peace education for me is about small things. It's about changing minds, hearts, and hands. It's dealing and sharing our pain and our joy. It's about contemplative silence and speaking out. It's about social justice. It's about democracy. It's about equity. It will challenge our rampant materialism in the world, which is the basis of why we're not at peace. If we develop respect and understanding, individual and communal action. The oceans of peace are in our hearts and minds. Thank you very much.